The Voice came into Nashville, had auditions. I ended up all the way to the blind audition part with the 4 chairs, but I couldn't get them to turn. Well, I always joke around. I say they all turned just a little late, you know. That was its own experience, that like 7 auditions to get to that one spot with the chairs. But there was so much LA time in there, you know. The first auditions were in Nashville, but then eventually you call you out to LA. And before my blind audition, Christina Aguilera had a terrible hangover, I was told. She wouldn't come out of her trailer. And I'd been waiting at the Warner Brothers lot. I've been waiting in this alley to go backstage for my performance of Walking in Memphis by Marc Cohn for like 45 minutes, sweating in this suit, just like frustrated with her because she was the only one person holding this whole thing up for hundreds of people. The only cool thing was, because I waited so long in that alley, I walked down, I peeked my head and I saw Christian Bale taking off his bat suit, and he was in the bat cave. And I was like, oh, wow. And I didn't talk to him or anything, but I was like, it was cool to see that. I got to see that at least.
Welcome to Creating a Life in Music. My name is Mike Salo. I'm a guitarist and music educator from Minneapolis, Minnesota in the U.S., and I want to know how other musicians make their living, how they got there, how they sustain it, and most importantly, the insights and tips they may have for the rest of us. I interview musicians from all over the world, from various parts of the music industry, to break down the question, how do I do music full time? So join me as we discover the many different ways to create a life in music. If you're a guitar player who's ever wanted to attend music college but couldn't because it's too expensive or too far away, or maybe you're just beyond that point in your life and you're just too busy with your own family and your own career to commit to something like that, I would highly recommend going and checking out fretboardbiology.com. At only $29 a month, Fretboard Biology takes out all the guesswork, putting the right things in the right order. It's highly structured, highly organized, college-level guitar program designed by one of the top guitar educators on the planet, Joe Elliott. Joe was head of the guitar department at McNally Smith for a number of years, where he designed the entire guitar curriculum, as well as being head over at Musicians Institute in Hollywood for many, many years. He knows what you need to know. And you can get 50% off your first month when you go to fretboardbiology.com/register-salo, my last name, that's S-A-L-O-W. So fretboardbiology.com/register-salo. You were here for how long before you moved to Nashville? So you started doing stuff here? Is that where you started?
Yeah.
You started doing music here and gigging a bunch. At what point were you in Nashville? Because I know you play with Zach a bunch, right? Bruford?
Yeah, but well, we actually never got to play together. We knew each other. So the short version is I went to 2008 through 2012, moved to Nashville. I'd just been doing like church gigs and stuff before that. Spinning wheels. I started the music career in high school. So late 90s, early 2000s, I started a band, played O'Gara's every Wednesday for a couple years in St. Paul, opened for G.B. Layton, Tim Mahoney, Gear Daddies, Martin Zeller, a lot of opening slots. But I just never could get could never get traction, it felt like. I had some cool things. Like I played for the Minnesota Wild, I played in a basement. Marion Gabrick was the player. I played at his house for a party once, a couple anthems for Gopher games and things. And so that stuff was cool. But in 2008, the opportunity to go to Nashville came up, and it was like, let's try it. So I went there, and within a week, I went to Craigslist, and I was like, Craigslist was a place where you wouldn't get murdered as much maybe as you would today. It was safer then. So
yeah, I remember the times.
Yeah, you remember. So 2008, I answered an ad. It was Universal Music seeks putting together a band, auditioning male vocalists, something like that. And I was like, okay. So I went down to Music Row. I auditioned for this kind of like it was supposed to be the Eagles meets Alabama, but current for that time. but it ended up feeling more like a boy band. But I joined it anyway, and we just started writing. So within a week, I just started writing with this band, with writers like Rivers Rutherford, and I mean the biggest names in Nashville. We were just writing songs with them, and I was like, cool. Well, that felt like I was further along in my career at that point than I had been in Minnesota. But there was zero draw. 6 months later, the deal went away. And so I basically just dug myself a financial hole. And you couldn't play gigs in Nashville to make a living. It was tip jars, So it was somehow I made it down there. I started working in IT. I couldn't do music full time anymore in Nashville. And then I got away from my path. I turned into I worked for a bunch of neurosurgeons, making sure their computers worked when they were doing, filleting people's backs open and putting spines together.
Jesus.
I got far away from music.
So you were doing it full time when you were full time in Minnesota?
Yeah, Minnesota was like, so many gig opportunities. Now, granted, it was like bar. So it's like, yeah, I could play 5 bars a week, which I did. For 20 years, I did like 5 nights a week, 4-hour gigs. After a couple thousand shows, it was like, what am I doing? Had some name recognition, but not in the industry. I wanted more than that. So defining success for me in the music business was Elvis. Elvis was like the goal. And in order to get to that, I knew I needed something bigger than Minnesota and gigs. But I was able to I think back then I was making a good $50,000 a year just playing gigs, and I was okay with it, but I was like, this is not the end all. So.
Yeah, it's very confined. It's like an oasis. It's kind of confined to the area, but there's a lot of work here. And certain people can break out, but I have found even like a lot of my peers, to break out, they essentially leave, or right. They're just comfortable with kind of this being the thing. And I think there's nothing wrong with that. That's the cool thing about town is that there is so much work. Like that's the nice thing. That's one of the things one of the reasons I stay, but not I'm doing so much online stuff. I feel an option now to leave at some point because so much of my stuff is online. It becomes remote. But the nice thing is anytime I've needed work, it's not been super hard to go and find groups to play with or schools to teach at, or, there's a lot of music in this town and it's paid. So you were in Nashville. Did you did you come back here after Nashville, or did you go to LA after Nashville?
Yeah, no, we came back. I got divorced, from my first wife there. And I was like, part of Nashville was more of a geographical change to I'd been sober 4 years. I was trying to figure out, I love my first ex-wife. She's great. She's the mother of my 2 kids. Amazing mom, but we just weren't real compatible. We met at O'Gara's at the bar, and I was kind of a drunken mess. So, so when I got sober, I kind of felt like we didn't really know each other that well. So we tried to make it work, and I felt like Nashville was a music idea, yes, but also trying to save a marriage. And when that fell apart, she moved back to Minneapolis with the kids, and I didn't realize that wasn't necessarily allowed, but I also knew that she didn't have any other support there. So I followed suit. I ended up signing a deal with Universal, a writing deal, publishing deal. But I had to give that up because it was either, see my kids once a month or have a relationship with them and get rid of the pub deal. So I went back to like the church and the gig world, gave up my IT job too that I had, and just went into the church world, which, did pretty well too. But it was 2012, 2013 when I got back to Minneapolis, and I was really discontented. So I was like, well, now what? Like, I wanted to get closer to the industry, and I felt I was much closer in Nashville. I always wanted to get to Los Angeles, but I've got these kids that are at that time 5 and 7. And so I kind of resigned myself to the fact that if I'm going to be a good father, music's going to have to kind of hold off. And I mean, I can do it, but the ultimate, moving to LA and that dream had to be paused so I wouldn't miss softball games and dances. And I'll never regret that. I mean, my kids are 8. I'm moving my son into college next week in Florida. He's 18. My daughter's 20 in November. And so I'll never regret taking that pause of like 9 years and just staying put in Minnesota, hating every winter, but loving my kids.
Yeah, I mean, that's a completely understandable decision. I mean, I feel like a lot of people would make that same decision. I mean, I've heard similar stories from many people actually of like,
I don't know if I would have made it. I don't know if I would have made that decision alone though, because I was in Nashville when she moved back. I spent about 3 months trying to figure out how to make it work. And finally this friend of mine, David, who was a pastor, I talked to him and I kind of confided in him what was happening, music career, IT career was actually good too. It was both this new publishing deal that could go somewhere, kids in Minnesota. And without hesitation, he said, you'll never regret, kids being with your kids. You might regret, the other. And I was like, yeah. And he was right. So thank God I listened to wise counsel. And because of that, it was 2 years into being back in Minnesota, 2015, 2016. So about 2 or 3 years, I was having Chipotle is my favorite, cleanish, quick food.
Yeah, I understand.
Kids and I loved going there. And we were there one summer in 2016 and got a call from Trans-Siberian Orchestra people. This woman who had seen me post a video of Tennessee Whiskey, a cover, which I did a terrible job at. I mean,
I'm sure it's great.
Yeah. It was rough, I thought. But she was like, hey, would you come and audition? Well, have you heard of us first? And I was like, well, yeah. But to be honest, I'd only heard the
Yeah.
I was like, I didn't remember hearing any vocals in there. So, but then I looked them up. I said, yeah, I'd love to audition. I went and looked them up online that night, and I was like, wow, that's cool. I'd always seen the billboards, but I'd never seen it. So I joined that band, and I think that's when I really started to feel like there were other avenues, besides playing gigs. There was this other way I could reach that Elvis goal that was always up there. It's like I could go play and sing at sold out arenas and fulfill that part of the dream. No, it's not my original music, but it did something to fulfill that, which was great.
Yeah, I think maybe, and I've talked to many people about this, like, I think as you mature, I almost started to get to a point for myself where I was like, you know, everyone grows up, I think, every musician has that desire to like make their own music, make that the thing, get really big. And then I think as you get older, I think the what you have, the Trans-Siberian, for me, it seems just as appealing. Where it's like, well, that sounds awesome too. Whereas when I was younger, I was like, no, I don't want to do that. I want to be in my own band. And it took a while actually to get to that point too, where you wanted to be. And then as you get further along in the industry, I think, and people probably hit this at certain levels. Maybe some people don't want to do that at all. But yeah, there was a point for me where I was like, well, that sounds great too. Like be able to just play in something that bigger, like that big, like that's bigger than me. That just seems awesome. So I think I kind of, as I've gotten older, I'm like, they're just as great. Like to be the name that you have yourself, like I don't know, insert person's name, Bruno Mars, Taylor Swift, whatever, Elvis. But also to be in that big of an act as part of the act, I think is also amazing. I think it's fucking awesome. Like, yeah. So I think it's pretty cool.
Yeah, it was a whirlwind to get in there. But
if you're a guitar player or bass player, you should really have a copy of Guitar Pro tablature software. I've been using Guitar Pro for like 15 years, and I really can't live without it. At this point, it's sort of an industry standard within the guitar education realm, and it's really easy to use. You can make all your licks and write out all your songs, and you can actually use it in conjunction with ultimateguitar.com, where you can download Guitar Pro files and learn all your favorite songs. So I couldn't recommend this software enough. And if you use the code MikeGP at checkout, you can get 10% off your copy of Guitar Pro 8. That's Mike, MikeGP, at checkout, guitar-pro.com. So you went into audition.
Yeah.
And how...
Yeah, they have a studio in Tampa, Florida. So the guy who envisioned this whole thing 25 years ago, this year coming up is the 25th anniversary. Paul O'Neill was his name. He sadly passed the year before I joined, so I never got to meet him. But he envisioned he heard that song, Sarajevo. You know, dun, 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 dun. Obviously that had been written a long time ago, but he heard it in his head as a rock thing. So he called his friend Al Petrelli, the guitar player, who at that time was with Megadeth, I think, had been with Alice Cooper, whatever. They get in the studio together and they make an arrangement of it. And it was just, wasn't expecting to be what it is today, but a radio picked it up in the Midwest, a radio station, and it just blew up. And it was like, I think that was like 95 or somewhere in there. And, you know, Paul O'Neill went on to write actual sort of rock opera sort of things. It felt like, it was like, they were stories. They were beautiful stories of, you know, a girl that needed to find her way back home during the holiday season. That they were tear-jerking stories, and then they were like other themes of like war and oppression, and it was just done so beautifully with the lasers and the lights and so I hopped on this thing as the bus was well down the road. I didn't have to see the growing pains of where they started in like little clubs, 10 dates a year. You know, I jumped on when they're the top 11 grossing touring act of all time, you know, under U2, Bruce Springsteen, Dave Matthews Band, Rolling Stones. And so, you know, I'm jumping in this state-of-the-art tour bus, catering done for you, everything's organized for you. So like you were saying, the pros are like, everything's done for you. You just show up, and I only sing 2 songs a night. I mean, it's unbelievable.
Yeah. Was this before or after The Voice?
Oh, it was after. The Voice was kind of like, I think when we started talking earlier, I'd mentioned like LA, my only vision of that was visiting my aunt and uncle a couple times, 2, 3, 4 times over a 10-year period, and being amazed by, my cousins took us to Disneyland once and the ocean, and I loved the palm trees, the lemon trees, the orange trees, whatever. And so I had this like in Minnesota, this vision of a kid of like always wanting to live someplace like that, tropical paradise. And so the voice, I got back from Nashville, or actually it was towards the end of my Nashville where the voice came into Nashville, had auditions. I ended up getting on all the way to the blind audition part with the 4 chairs, but I couldn't get them to turn. Well, I always joke around. I say they all turned just a little late, and that was its own experience. That like 7 auditions to get to that one spot with the chairs, but there was so much LA time in there, The first auditions were in Nashville, but then eventually they call you out to LA, and so that bug again was like, God, I'd love to get out here. We were in Santa Monica, Culver City. I remember before my blind audition, Christina Aguilera had a terrible hangover, I was told. She wouldn't come out of her trailer. And I'd been waiting at the Warner Brothers lot. I've been waiting in this alley to go backstage for my performance of Walking in Memphis by Marc Cohn for like 45 minutes, sweating in this suit, just like frustrated with her because she was the only one person holding this whole thing up for hundreds of people. And the only cool thing was, because I waited so long in that alley, I walked down and I peeked my head and I saw Christian Bale taking off his bat suit, and he was in the bat cave. And I was like, oh, wow. And I didn't talk to him or anything, but I was like, it was cool to see that. I got to see that at least. But the voice didn't go anywhere. So that was 2012. So it was like, I think that was season 2 of that show, if I'm not mistaken. But it cemented the bug for California. And then Trans-Siberian, when we started touring there, I think my first tour was 2018. And we would hit, the West Coast and again, California, the whole spot, from the tippy top all the way down, San Diego. Again, I fell in love with the state of California. I had to figure out a way to get here. Well, I fell in love with one of the singers from Trans-Siberian Orchestra, and she and I had a short relationship, a great one, but ultimately wasn't meant to be. But I ended up moving to Vegas for a brief time, so I was getting closer. I lived in Vegas for 6 months with her. Post-COVID, I think that was. Went back to Minnesota. And then my friend Kevin Souza, whose tattoo I have here, he passed a little over a month ago, but he's the whole reason I got to where I am right now. Musically, we met through Trans-Siberian Orchestra during the 2021 season. COVID was still kind of scaring people in the touring world, and so we had to have extra musicians on, come on, in case someone went down, with illness.
Yeah.
So Kevin was there, and Kevin Souza lived 4 blocks from where I'm at now here in Hermosa Beach. And he became my rock musically from 18 months ago when I met him till, when he just recently passed. But kind of opened my whole music career changed meeting him. And it was amazing. But
Yeah, did that spark the album? Or is that something that
I
was
mean, yeah,
already?
I think the record itself that came about starting in COVID. I started writing it like a little before COVID, during COVID. And then I met a guy, Jason, who ended up being a friend and a fan, and asked me, how do you make it in this business, music business? And it's like, there isn't. I told him my Randy Moss story, which was when Randy Moss was a Minnesota Viking. That was one of the cool events I got to do, is through my friend John. John had a lending business called Minnesota Lending Company, and he put on this bass fishing tournament, and Randy Moss loved bass fishing. So I got to go be the musician for this thing. And they flew in Tracy Byrd, who was a country artist. So I played a few songs. Tracy Byrd played a few songs. And then I get Randy Moss and Nate Burleson up on stage dancing around. And I remember I talked to Randy after the event. We were chatting, and he was asking me about the music business. Because I feel like most athletes, the pro athletes I've talked to, are just infatuated with what we do for a living. Just like I'm infatuated with what they do and how they do it, body prep, all that. So Randy and I were talking, and I was like, the difference between you and I is like, and we came to find out that we were born the same day, the same year, the same day, everything. I'm like, okay. So we were born at the exact same time, but your path with your talent is just kind of laid out. You do well with your football. You catch it great, you run fast, you go to college, you do the same thing. Yes, you have the ability, but
there's a charted path for people who want to do that. And if you're really, really good, you just take that path. And
exactly.
it's oversimplification of it, but it's the difference between being an artist. There's not like a laid out, I sort of play music and go to LA or Nashville, I guess. I guess you could say that would be somewhat of a path, but with them, it's like play football in college, play football in high school with the hopes to go to a good college. Then when you get to that good college, play great in college with the hopes to go to the NFL. That's path. And work your ass off. Yeah.
Yeah, there's not a whole lot of, our musician path is a spider web, and I never would have thought mine would be the way it is. And I'm like, and I'm so grateful it is the way it is, but I wouldn't have chosen. But I'd be dead if I was in charge earlier. So
one of the best things you can do as a musician is to protect your own hearing. I've been using these Eargasm high fidelity earplugs for months now, and I really love them. They're nice and discreet, high quality, and they don't make any of the sound muffled. They let in the right frequencies that I need on gigs or at shows. You can get 10% off your order if you use code MSALO10 at checkout. That's my first initial M, my last name Salo, SALOW 10 at checkout to get 10% off your order at eargasm.com. So the Trans-Siberian Orchestra thing happens. That's after The Voice. Was that video that you posted anything to do with The Voice, or was that just something you put on YouTube, or that this producer saw? Tennessee Whiskey.
No, what was interesting is my second ex-wife, when we were married briefly for our 1-year marriage or whatever it was, she said something to me once. She's like, you should really, I was in and out of recovery. So, I've been sober now, 2.5 years, but back then I would just bounce in and out. And I think I didn't have a lot of motivation. And so she said, you really got to post. Things were happening socially, back in This was 2015. It's like, you got to be on the internet. You got to be online, have a presence. So she kept harping on me, and she thought I sang Tennessee Whiskey well enough where she's like, do a recording of it. And so the reason that I'm down on that recording is because I kind of did it to appease her, and I just did a one take. I was like, I wasn't, I just didn't have the drive to do it, but it was enough. And
he did his job.
Yeah. And so Danielle is her name. She would look for singers, that kind of voice, Chris Stapleton, Paul O'Neill, the creator of Trans-Siberian, would call it whiskey dust. So she would look for songs that she knew the singer might have that if they're covering a song, So she found me by typing in Tennessee Whiskey into YouTube and just listening to a bunch of different people doing it. And then she liked my version, found my website, got the info, and yeah.
That's so wild. That's such a crazy story if you think about it. Because of it's like this producer for this huge world-renowned show is just like, let's see what YouTube has, and going, oh, this is the guy we're looking for. You think it's one of those things that I think there are people in the industry, or maybe even not in the industry, just people in general who might go no one, they don't do that. They don't just search YouTube. And no, people get found on that stuff all the time. I mean, that's we were just talking about Charlie. That was a Instagram drum, putting up videos on Instagram, and then the drummer that was quitting, the band at the time goes, I'm quitting, huge fan, want you to replace me. Yeah. Because he had back problems. He had back stuff. And so I think it's something that totally happens. I love hearing that story because it's it's that thing that I think some musicians really strive. They go on, put their stuff all over the internet for hopes of something like that to happen.
Yeah. And I think
every once in a while it does.
You could zoom out even further and go, so I have to have gratitude for my ex-wife for kind of kicking me to do it. And then I had gratitude for Chris Stapleton for covering the song. And then I thought I had gratitude for George Jones, which I kind of do, but he didn't write it. So I kept going back to the two people that wrote it. And I was like, and then
the first guy, David Allan Coe, was the first guy who recorded it was David Allan Coe. Yeah, but
it was Chris Stapleton really deserves all the credit for today's arrangement, because that arrangement, so cool.
I don't know how he got there. I don't know how he got there with that song. Yeah, I think some people don't realize that that's a cover. And if you listen to the Tennessee Whiskey original, it is nothing like the Chris Stapleton.
Yeah. Nothing like it.
Yeah,
it's crazy.
That's pretty wild, man. That's really cool. Were you? And I suppose you think about it though. You have a website. You're already doing the thing, so that's also a helping. It's everything kind of coming together at the same time of found the video, liked the guy. Because I'm sure they did a little bit of vetting of well, who is this guy? Click web. Ooh, has a website, has done a bunch of work, experienced musician. Because I'm sure you have a bio on there and stuff like that. So they're able to vet that, as opposed to maybe someone who, just put up some covers and doesn't actually have the experience, because that's a huge thing. I've heard that before with other musicians of the drummer I met and talked with a long time ago, the drummer of Breaking Benjamin. And he was telling, it was me, him, and talking to Charlie, and he had explained part of the reason he got the gig was because one of the questions was, do you have, or no, it wasn't one of the questions he already knew. He's like, well, I wanted to hire you because I know you and I know you already had a lot of experience in the industry. That was a big factor of just having the touring experience or the experience of gigging a lot. I think it's the same with Charlie, he was touring with the band before that. So I think having that background is also a huge, huge factor. Maybe not always the factor, like, but that's all that comes to fruition of like the video at the right time. And then like when they click on your website, it's like this whole backlog of like, oh, this guy is legit, like does all this stuff, as opposed to getting sent to a no website or whatever, you know what I'm saying? So you think of all these.
You're right. You got that experience too. Like that's why I was so grateful for all those gigs, all those bar gigs, to get the stage prepping time, like to be comfortable up on a stage, and then all those church gigs where I had to learn the click so well.
Yeah, in-ears. Yeah. Get used to that. That's a whole different thing.
Heck yeah. So by the time you get to Trans-Siberian audition, it's like, oh, I already have a great set of in-ears. I know, but I wouldn't have, that church gig, that scared me at first because I was not, 3,000 shows on a stage without a click. And then you go in and it was loud monitors. And then you go into this little isolated, sealed in-ear world with this loud thing in the middle.
and then like your own personal mix, and you're like, what? I don't know. What should I have up? What should I have down? Yeah. I was encouraged a lot when I was in college to get church gigs, and a lot of my friends have them. And I didn't realize why for the longest time. I was like, I don't want to get up on Sunday morning and go play church. Like I went to church my entire childhood, every Sunday. Like I've been to church a lot or whatever. And then it was like, when I first got one, I just kind of was like, all right, yeah, I'll do this. It's decent pay, really easy. The songs are typically very easy for, and that was the first learning curve, was just like, whoa, in-ears are not what I thought. Cause you think it's just going to be like, not much of a difference until like you go there. And so the first time I went and played church, it was like, do you have in-ears? I was like, oh no, but I can buy some. Like, no, we have extras that no one uses. We have like replaceable ones, whatever. But they were the Shure, like $100 ones. Yeah. So you put those in and you're like, oh, like this is what my guitar sounds like. Like, what is this? And then you're like, and then everything's just kind of like, in those in-ears, it's like everything's just like thin, and then it's just a weird difference. And but once you get used to it, it's fine. You just get used to it, and you don't really think. I never think about it. I got like a 8-driver universal in-ears now, and I hear everything just fine. And you learn to like adjust. Well, for guitar players, you learn to like adjust your tone in a certain way, because you start to really get an ear for what the tone is actually doing, because it hits in-ears and headphones differently than when you're just listening through a cabinet or something. And so then you start to work out that. And but yeah, I mean that's a really, I think the church gig thing is a really easy way to get good, like professional experience as far as sound goes. So like the in-ear game and packs and wireless stuff, and not having a drummer directly behind you, or not having like cabinets by you, and just, it's all just in here, and having a click and having tracks maybe in the background. And then, so that's a good point I think you're making that's a huge thing. So you think about that too, of like, oh, I'm so glad I had these church gigs this whole time, because now I know what this is.
I'm so grateful for, if I could put a like manual together, and ask like a college, like a course, it would be, if it was a 4-year college, it would be 2 years of just grinding it on the road, like bar to bar, setting all your own gear up, tearing it down, playing 4 hours straight, singing 4 hours straight, take a short break. I mean, just the grind of that. And then 2 years of getting up super early, doing the church gig, click, 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 click. And then by the time you get a call, I mean, it's like, I think that's why for me, like I just have I don't complain about the Trans-Siberian gig at all. There's not, because I've been to those other worlds, and I mean, this is like, there are some cons, of course, like waiting around is sometimes hard. Like, you know, you've got to perform at the top of your ability, but you know that your song isn't up for an hour.
Oh, I hate that. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I would rather be performing more the whole time, but
Yep.
but it's not as taxing vocally. And so that makes it easy. So there's just, thank God for
it's
all
just
that
anxiety
experience.
driven. Yeah. More time for anxiety to build, which I've definitely been there, where it's like, it's funny because you have anxiety to play, and so you're anxious about doing the thing, but the only thing that you want to do is also do the thing. So you're just like, I just need to get on stage. And it's funny because it's causing the anxiety, but it's the only cure. It's this weird dichotomy. I remember being on stage, like big crowds, and as we're like kind of getting ready, just being like super, just like panicky. And then as soon as you play, it just all subsides and you're great and having fun. And that's so funny how that works. But that's got to be how often. So you joined in 2018. So was it 18? Your first tour, you said?
Yeah.
So did that until, of course, COVID. So how many gigs is that a year when you start?
Well, it's just November, December every year.
Is it? Okay.
Christmas season. So that's the beauty. The other beauty of that band is we start beginning of November, 2 weeks of rehearsals in Middle America in Omaha in an arena. We have 2 different bands that cover the whole United States for those 2 months, which it's only 6 weeks. So we don't start till mid-November, and we end on right before New Year's Eve. And so we're covering every major city in the United States in 6 weeks. So it takes 2 bands. And I'm on the West Coast band, which is kind of deceiving because it's Middle America, and then it goes up, covers Washington, California, Texas, then goes over to Florida, which is East Coast, covers that, and then back up. But that's just because the East Coast has a lot more cities condensed up in Boston, New York, and all that.
Yeah. So do you guys hit like Minneapolis then? Or is that the other band?
Yeah. We do excel on the West Coast.
Nice.
Every year, which is insane because last tour, Al's a really cool guy, the music director. He was there at the beginning. He arranged all this stuff, wrote a lot of original stuff in the show, was BFFs with Paul O'Neill. And so he had this idea last tour. He's like, when we get to Minneapolis, they call it Minneapolis. They don't understand Twin Cities. They don't understand. Yeah. So I always have to be like, hey, call it St. Paul or Twin Cities. Don't say Minneapolis when we're at the Excel. It's not gonna land.
Yeah, exactly. They'll be like, everyone's gonna be like, what? Like, you're not. Yeah.
So Al's like, what if during this one song I had a bunch of falsettos and at the end of the song, and so it worked out perfect to do the end of Purple Rain, Prince's Purple Rain, doing that whatever that melody is. And so we did it, and the lights went purple, but no one really got it, I don't think.
Really?
So yeah, I think like maybe a quarter of the people got it, but I think they're so in Christmas mode at that moment that I don't think they could get it. But it's a trip to be like, to be introduced on that stage where, I'd seen so many Wild games growing up. I saw Bruce Springsteen there. I saw Depeche Mode once. And I remember going in there during Wild games, especially, and being like, to be able to sing in an arena. So like I said, it's check that box,
Yeah, man.
but I'm still trying to align them because again, it's November and December. I got January and through October where I'm trying to get myself in an arena again.
Yeah.
I think 500 has been the biggest venue I've been able to fill so far. So I've got about 9,500 more seats to fill. So we're working on it.
Yeah. Yeah, man, that's awesome. That's so cool. There was something I was going to ask you about that I'm blanking on right now. But yeah, so the album. So there's an album out, new stuff in the works, right? Because Rodeo is a new tune that I think did I play that with you that night? I think we did.
Yeah, we did. Yeah.
I couldn't remember if I played it because I thought we might have cut one song just before we started, and I wasn't sure if it was that song that we cut. I know there was something.
We did that one, but we didn't have the tracks yet, and so I started it a little too fast. I realized, but yeah, we did that. The album idea was like, these collection of songs that had been around 2-3 years. Jason, the guy who started the label, he and my manager Nick, we came up with a plan to release 6 singles from this 10-song album last year. So 1 year ago this week, it started with Ain't Hitting Me Yet, from this album called Keep Dreaming. And it was awesome. We kept releasing singles all the way up till January of this year. And then the album came out the end of January this year. And then it was like, okay, now the next singles, Rodeo, which you mentioned, Mission Critical, which I put out 1 month ago, or 2 weeks ago now, 2 weeks ago. And then I Know Me comes out in 2 weeks. So now we're doing singles every month. And I kind of like that way, not better. I always wanted to do an album, and it made sense because you had this pause of COVID and a collection of songs. Let's put them out as an album. But now it's like these singles I'm working on are with producers from LA since after moving here and meeting people in the industry here. And the sound is changing to what I always wanted, that because I produced the first album, Keep Dreaming. And it's okay. It's a little more like Americana folk sounding. And I didn't want that. But I didn't know how to make beats. Like if you listen to like Taylor Swift's newer music, or even Maroon 5 newer stuff today, there's like the digitalized beats and I didn't know how to do that. And so I found producers out here that did, and that's where the sound has changed, which I love. Took a while to get there, but
yeah, man. I think the singles thing is a great approach these days, especially because it gives you time to focus on one tune at a time, if that's what you're doing. And then the release thing is just, at the end of it, then there's an album. And I remember what I was going to ask. I was going to ask about the COVID stuff. So you moved to LA after COVID, right?
Yeah. I did that Vegas. The Vegas stint was in the COVID era.
So you had that break then. So were you still? So you've mainly been gigging. So how did that affect what you're doing, the COVID stuff? Because you obviously weren't doing tours with Trans-Siberian for a couple of years there, and
well, actually, we only missed 1 year, and then the year that we
really? Okay.
In 2020. That's why 2021's tour was just contentious, and that's why I got to meet Kevin Souza was who changed my life, because we were still wearing masks everywhere, even in 2021. In 2020, we did a live stream, which was cool, but obviously it wasn't the same. We flew to Nashville and we filmed for, probably 5 days. They did about 2 weeks worth of work in production. Us as performers came in, did 5 days worth of work, and then they put it out one day. They never showed it again. So it was a lot of work for one performance. And we were really excited for 2021. And we miraculously made it through. I mean, we had a few cases on the crew and a few singers that went down, but for my own personal music, it was COVID was the best thing that happened for me, because I got into recovery. Like I said, I met Kevin Souza, and COVID, I was kind of just stale. I met him, and it kind of upped my recovery life. It upped my music life. He kind of showed me, how to exist as a sober man one day at a time in the music business, and live in Los Angeles and have a dream life. And so and that's all because of, again, if we do that zoom out thing, if I don't get the Tennessee Whiskey song out and I don't get the Trans-Siberian gig, then I don't meet Kevin, then I probably don't live here. I might have moved to LA because I was getting closer, but not in Hermosa Beach. I might have ended up in Santa Monica or Venice, or who knows, but it's so cool how stuff happens,
Yeah, it really is. In hindsight, especially because, you think about the Nashville stuff, and now you're in one of the bigger acts of Trans-Siberian Orchestra, which is pretty wild. Maybe would have happened if you stayed in Nashville. Maybe Nashville would have turned out, you never know. It could have, been a life of more IT.
Right. Yeah.
Who knows? I mean, you can't really, but that's cool, man. Hey, it was great having you. I appreciate you coming on.
Yeah, man, it's fun chatting. We get to play a show together August 31st.
Yeah, man.
And at First Ave, 7th Street entry, which the last time I was in that space, I auditioned for In Excess, the band.
Oh, did you really? Nice.
Yeah. So and that was before the voice even.
Yeah, that. Right, that's the guitar thing. Yeah. That's the one that I think Dua Lipa ripped off. I don't know. Totally ripped off that song. Yeah. Yeah, man. So I usually like to ask one final thing as far as like advice for people trying to do music full time. What would be like, you could condense it down into like a single thought? What would that be of like the biggest piece of advice you would give someone who's trying to do music full time?
Yeah, I mean, that's why we're here. And again, thanks for having me on. It really is awesome to hang with you and talk about, life in the music business. If I went back and could tell myself before I started, I would have said, don't do something that's mobile. Like I was doing eventually, like web design, IT. Do something that's on a computer that is a career, and always have that. Because the times in my life when I had to rely solely on music were pretty stressful, and it took away from the creative fun part of it. It was like, oh, I have to do this now. And I hated that. Looking back, it's like, So like I always have something. Like for me right now, my something on just the computer that isn't. It still has to do with music, but it's a subscription-based service where I get to go deeper into stories, deeper into songs, offer up like downloads of the demos, behind the scenes content. It's like a content-based service that I don't have to be on a performance to do it, but it still is mobile. So wherever I go, I can still do that job. I would just having a plan B. I also am getting into addiction therapy recovery courses, so I can get certified there to help others struggling with addiction. So I'll have that too. And I just think that that's, as much as I didn't want to ever, I thought, no, this is it. I'm going to do music. There's something great to that too, because when you have to make it, because you have to pay a bill, you do have that extra push to go get the work. But it's also nice to have some relief for yourself if you don't have to take every gig, because some you may not want to do.
Yeah. And I think, to point to the mobile thing, having that subscription-based thing, I consider that still being kind of part of the music industry. And I think there's a lot of stuff that you can do in the industry that kind of checks that box of like backup mobile. And because one of the things I talked a lot about with a lot of guests is, not with everyone, but people who do it, is like that having multiple sources of income, that you're not so, because that allows for a little bit of freedom in a way, because you're able to, maybe there's one thing you do that will bring in more money, that so you can sustain the other things you want to do. So for instance, like for me, I most of my income is teaching, but that also allows me to do all the other stuff around music, but I'm teaching music in the process. And then it allows me to, create and play a lot. And so there's just so many aspects of I think the industry and playing, to where, I think what you pointed out there is a great piece of advice. I think a lot of people get stuck in this mode of like, I just am going to do this one aspect of the industry. And sometimes it can be quite a struggle. Sometimes it pays off. But I think most times, even for people who it's paid off with, I've seen a lot of other sources of income helping to lift up the music career.
Yeah.
And you gotta live.
Teaching's a great one too. Yeah.
Well, cool, man.
I've done that.
Yeah. Well, yeah, man, it's great having you. If you'd like to join my Patreon to get your questions answered by the guests, then you can go to patreon.com/Mike Salo. There are several tiers there that you can take part in, and lots of different perks like pre-recorded guitar lessons or even one-on-one guitar lessons with me. There are live master classes every week for certain tiers. And again, you can go to patreon.com/Mike Salo to check that out.